We're live in Salford for a TV first. It's Boris Johnson versus Jeremy Corbyn. The ITV debate. Good evening. In just over 3 weeks, we'll be voting in what many think is the most important general election of our lifetimes. Tonight, the Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, debate face-to-face, responding to questions from ITV viewers. And you at home can take part too using the hashtag #ITVDebate. Later tonight at 10 o'clock, you'll be able to see other leaders on ITV when Lib Dem Joe Swinson, the SNP's Nicola Sturgeon, the Brexit Party's Nigel Farage and Green Party co-leader Sian Berry will be interviewed live by Nina Hussain. But now it's time for Boris Johnson versus Jeremy Corbyn. Before we take our first question tonight, they'll each now make an opening statement. Mr. Corbyn, it's over to you.
Thank you, Julie, and to everyone watching this debate tonight. This election gives you a real choice about your future, the future of your community and of our country. Labour is offering real change and real hope. We will build a fairer Britain that cares for all, where wealth and power are shared. The Conservative government is failing. It's failed on the economy, on the climate crisis, the National Health Service and on Brexit. We will get Brexit sorted by giving you, the people, the final say and implement whatever you decide. Too many families are without a proper home, struggling to make ends meet, while tax cuts are handed to the super rich. We can do better than this with a Labour government on your side, a Labour government for the many, not just the few.
Mr. Corbyn, thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. There's only one reason why we're having this election. That is that we have a deadlocked Parliament that will not deliver Brexit. And whether you voted for Leave or Remain, people want to get Brexit done and to unleash the potential of this entire country. And we Conservatives can. Because if you vote for us, we have a deal that is ready to go, approved by every one of the 635 Conservative candidates standing at this election. And as soon as we can get that deal through Parliament, as we can in the next few weeks, we can get on with the people's priorities. And that's the choice. Dither and delay, deadlock and division under a Corbyn-Sturgeon coalition with 2 referendums, another one on the EU and then another one on Scotland, or we can end this national misery, break the deadlock, get Brexit done and make 2020 a year of prosperity and growth where we invest in our NHS and deal with the cost of living. Together, let's take this country forwards.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Well, we invited viewers from right across the country to submit questions. We've selected the questioners and they are in the studio with us this evening. The 2 leaders don't know what they'll be asked. Also here, the people who will listen to tonight's debate. Some have voted Conservative and some Labour in the past, and some have voted for other parties across the UK. And our first question tonight comes from Kath Sherlock from Bradford. Kath.
Both of you have promised that Brexit will be resolved in the next few months. But you're really telling us the truth. There have been so many broken promises. Can you reassure me that we will not be talking about this forever?
Thank you very much indeed, Kath. So a question about the timetable for Brexit. To respond first, Mr. Johnson.
Well, thank you very much, Kath. And yes, we certainly will come out on January the 31st because we have a deal that, as I say, is oven ready. It's ready to go. And it's approved, as I say, and not just by our friends and partners in the EU, but by every one of the 635 Conservative candidates. And it delivers everything that we wanted from Brexit. Our whole country comes out entire and perfect, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland together, and there is a sharp distinction between what we are proposing, getting Brexit done, unleashing the potential of this country, and next year, dither and delay with another referendum on the EU when Jeremy Corbyn, Mr Corbyn, cannot tell us which side he would campaign on in that
thank you, Mr
referendum.
Johnson. Your time's up for your first response to Kath's question.
Our priority is obviously to get it sorted. We will, within 3 months, negotiate a credible leave option with the European Union, and within 6 months put that to a referendum of the British people to decide between that option of leaving whilst protecting jobs and trade and the Good Friday Agreement with Europe, or remaining as full members of the European Union. That will be the choice put before the British people. The idea that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson's deal can be dealt with and finished by the end of January is such nonsense. What he's proposing is a trade deal with the United States that would take at least 7 years to negotiate, whilst at the same time saying he would negotiate a special trade deal with the European Union. The two things are actually incompatible.
Thank you, Mr Corbyn. So let's... So to open the debate, Mr Johnson said that he claims he has a deal that is ready to go, that you would have to negotiate a new deal after 3 years since we voted to leave the European Union. On that point, how would you respond?
Well, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, voted twice against Theresa May's deal, one time for it, then proposed his own deal, which narrowly got through the House of Commons with the support of the DUP, which is actually even worse than Theresa May's deal. He cannot protect jobs in this country on that basis. And I think it is time that we actually recognise we have to maintain a firm and good trading relationship with Europe. Otherwise, more jobs will be lost all over the country, as they've already been lost because of the uncertainty.
Well, we have a great deal that is supported, as Mr Corbyn says, not just by many members of his own party, but by the entire Conservative Party now. And 635 Conservative candidates have backed it. And what is the alternative? It's under Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party to consecrate next year to a 3-month extension in which he would, Mr Corbyn proposes to negotiate a new treaty, and then to put that to the people in a referendum. But we don't know, and I've asked this before, we don't know on which side Mr Corbyn would campaign. Is he going to campaign for leave or remain?
Can we ask Mr Corbyn to respond to that?
Very clearly, we will negotiate. We will negotiate an agreement, and we will put that alongside remain in a referendum. And our government will abide by that result. I will carry out the result of that referendum. There will be a genuine choice put before the people of Britain to make their decision, and we will carry it out.
At this election, what we're asking is for a mandate to govern. And Mr Corbyn is asking the people for a mandate to conduct a new negotiation next year when we don't need one because we've already got a deal. I think what people need to understand is whether he believes in the deal that he is proposing to do. Does he actually want to do this deal? Because if he doesn't believe in it, or if, absurdly, he was then going to campaign against it in the forthcoming
Perhaps you'd like to put the question directly to Mr Corbyn.
What is the point of Brussels offering him this deal? And I wonder whether Mr Corbyn could now tell us, are you going to campaign for leave or remain?
I want to bring people together, therefore there will be a referendum in which that decision will be made by the British people, and our government will abide by that decision. When you say you'll get it done, really, Mr Johnson, you are going to embark on probably 7 years of negotiations with the United States on a trade deal. You've already indicated that you will allow our National Health Service to be put at risk by a trade deal with the United States. You've already indicated that you would do a Canada-style agreement, which took at least 7 years to negotiate. So you're not going to get it done in a few months, and you know that perfectly well.
I'm noting here, of course, that we haven't heard whether you would campaign for Remain or to leave in that situation. But it is important that we put the point that you have just made directly to Mr Johnson about this timetable. Let's have a look at the timetable. You reckon that you can get your divorce deal done and a trade deal done by December 2020. Do you stick on a pledge on that deadline of December 2020? Have you dug yourself a new ditch?
Absolutely, because people said that we couldn't do a new deal in 3 months. And people said that they would never open up the treaty. They said it was impossible to do. Actually, we succeeded. And we have a great new deal that, as I say, is oven ready, ready to go. And I hear what Jeremy
Would you mint a new coin? Would you mint a new coin for December 2020?
I hear what people say about we have ample time to do a fantastic free trade deal with our friends and partners in the EU, because we're already in a state of perfect alignment, both for tariffs and for quotas. And we still have not heard, Julie, you will notice, there is I've answered your questions, but there is a glaring lacuna still in this debate. We still don't know. I'm sorry to say that. We still don't know. There is a vast inanition.
Okay, allow
Mr
Corbyn respond to the question from Mr Johnson.
Going to campaign for the deal he proposes to do, or is he going to invite his Labour colleagues to destroy
let's allow Mr Corbyn to respond to that.
He's created?
Thank you, Mr Johnson.
That's my question.
What I've said, and it's very clear, 3 months to negotiate, 6 months for a referendum, and that will bring that process to an end. What we know of the government's proposals, what we know of what Mr Johnson has done is a series of secret meetings with the United States in which they were proposing to open up our NHS markets, as they call them, to American companies. Freedom of Information Act request was made in order to find out what happened at these meetings. That's what happened at these meetings. Every single line of this document redacted out. A document here of US-UK negotiations, summary of specific negotiating objectives, full market access for US products to our National Health Service. You're going to sell our National Health Service out to the United States and Big Pharma.
This is an absolute invention. It is completely untrue. There are no circumstances whatever in which this government or any Conservative government will put the NHS on the table in any trade negotiation. Our NHS will never be for sale. And I'm amazed how often this comes up. The only reason that it comes up is because Mr Corbyn is trying to conceal the void at the heart of his Brexit policy and refusing to answer the question of which side he would take. Because the public have a right to know.
Thank you, Mr Corbyn. Just very briefly,
I've made the position clear. We will have a referendum, we will have negotiation, and we will abide by that result. It's the British people who will make that decision. I do think,
very briefly, we just need to move on to another question on Brexit.
Since the Prime Minister has claimed the NHS is not under threat,
we're going to come to the NHS very shortly.
Did his government agree with the US that there should be, in the terms of negotiations, full market access for United States medical companies into our National Health Service?
OK, we're going to talk about the NHS a little further, a little later. And we're now going to go to our next questioner, staying with the issue of Brexit. John Firth wants to ask about the possible threat to the Union, which could mean the breakup of the United Kingdom. John.
Is the Union worth sacrificing for Brexit?
Thank you very much indeed for that. Is the Union worth sacrificing for Brexit, Mr Corbyn?
Well, I hope the Union is not going to be broken up or sacrificed in this way, but the agreement that the Prime Minister negotiated, or he's put towards to Parliament, was about creating a border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, creating a different customs arrangement for Northern Ireland with the rest of Ireland, having promised to the Democratic Unionist Party he would never do that. Clearly, there is an issue there. Clearly, there are issues all around about this deal that he's proposed. And I do think that this deal is damaging to this country, damaging to the rights we have at work and consumer protection and environmental protection in this country, and very damaging to manufacturing industry jobs all over Britain, some of which have already gone because of uncertainty over Brexit.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Corbyn. Mr
Well,
Johnson.
we have a deal that keeps the whole of the UK together as we come out of the EU, and of course Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, be in no doubt about it, in order to secure power and the keys to number 10, are going to do a deal, and they probably already have done a deal, with Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP to form a Corbyn-Sturgeon coalition. And the price of that deal, the price of Nicola Sturgeon's support, let's be in no doubt, she's made it absolutely clear, would be a second referendum on the union with Scotland. I don't think we need another referendum on the union with Scotland. I've ruled it out. We had one in 2014. The people of Scotland voted very substantially to stay in the most successful political partnership of the last 300 years. Why put this country, this great country, through another referendum on Scotland? And why have a second referendum?
OK, thank you very much indeed.
And why have a second referendum on the EU?
Time up on your first response to that. Thank you very much indeed. So just as a quick, set something down in front of us, gentlemen, for clarity, is the union more important than Brexit, yes or no?
I think I ought to be able to reply to this nonsense.
Will you be able to rely on that? I'd just like to have
the idea there's going to be a coalition between Labour and the SNP. There's not going to be a coalition between Labour and anybody else. There are no deals that have been done, and there will be no deals that are done.
OK. For clarity, is the union more important than Brexit, Mr Corbyn? Yes.
Our country is obviously very, very important, and we have to bring this business to a close, and that's why we're proposing a trade deal with Europe or staying in, one or the other, as a way of bringing this issue to a close.
Thank you, Mr Johnson.
Let's be, the union is, of course, the most important thing, just to answer the question straight up. The union, and it's a fantastic thing. I'm proud to be not only Prime Minister, but also Minister for the Union.
OK.
Now, let's be clear that Jeremy Corbyn has said that he's open to a second referendum on Scotland early in the lifetime of the next Parliament, if he's head of the government, and Nicola Sturgeon has made it absolutely clear that the price of her support will be a referendum on Scotland in 2020. So you're going to have a year of two referendums, one on Scotland and one... If you have
let's allow Mr Corbyn to respond.
One on Scotland and one on the EU.
Mr Corbyn, if you do have
to...
if you do have to get to a point where you have to make a deal with the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon has already said, don't pick up the phone unless you can guarantee a second independence referendum. Can you rule it out before the end of the first year?
I've said there would be no deal with the SNP. There would be no support for a Scottish referendum in the early years of the next Labour government, because I want to invest in Scotland and give Scotland the $70 billion it needs in capital investment.
If
the SNP leadership choose to put the Conservative government back in office with its austerity programme, that's their choice.
He was going to rule it out. I listened Julie, I listened very carefully, as I always do, to Mr Corbyn. I didn't hear him say he was going to rule out a referendum on Scotland. Did you? We're ruling out a referendum. It's perfectly clear. It's perfectly clear that the price of Nicola Sturgeon's support for the chaotic coalition that he would comprise
OK, thank you. Let's allow him to respond. Can you rule it out?
There's 9 years of chaotic coalitions already.
OK. Can I turn, please, to the issue of Northern Ireland? In your hustings for your leadership race, Mr Johnson, you said, under no circumstances, whatever happens, will I allow the EU or anyone else to create any division down the Irish Sea. You spoke at another conference a year ago, saying that that would damage the fabric of the Union. And now, here we have your deal that you've presented to Parliament.
Absolutely. And that deal means that the whole of the UK can come out and do free trade deals around the world and do a great deal with our EU friends and partners, Northern Ireland included. What the people of Northern Ireland don't know...
Got a trade deal down the Irish Sea, trade border down the Irish Sea.
Not at all. Northern Ireland is part of the customs territory of the UK. It's there in black and white. And what the people of Northern Ireland do not know, and part of our tariff schedules and everything else, what the people of Northern Ireland do not know, and nor do the people of Ireland, is what kind of deal Jeremy Corbyn proposes to do. And he's got 100 of his MPs, and we still don't know, by the way, what he proposes to do, nor whether he is in favour of it or against it.
All right.
We have 100 of his MPs who have already said that they would vote against it. most of the shadow cabinet.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Corbyn, a quick response. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. A quick response.
The only problem with what Mr. Johnson just said is that he said exactly the opposite when he spoke to a DUP conference. You said there would be no border down the Irish Sea. Well, there is.
No, on the contrary, the whole of the UK comes out entire and perfect, as I have said. We do free trade deals together. We take back control together. We have our own immigration
so why
system,
have you
for
said
instance.
Then that
we can take back control of our borders. And one of the many mysteries about Mr. Corbyn's deal is would he take back control of immigration,
all right, well,
which people voted for.
We are going to stay on the issue of Brexit. We are going to have an Australian-style points. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We're going to stay on the issue of Brexit. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We're going to stay on this issue of Brexit. And underlying this whole issue, of course, is the question of trust and leadership. We have had hundreds of questions on this, and with that in mind, it's over to Fahad Saoud.
This whole nation will have watched you both throughout this campaign in utter despair. At the heart of all of this is one very simple question. How can we trust you? Under your leadership, the debate has become toxic and degraded with an appalling level of lies and childish abuse. How can this nation trust you to have the personal integrity and individual strength of character to look after our country's interest, rescue us from this mess, and bring us back together?
Thank you very much indeed. Boris Johnson,
thank you. Is it Fahad? Fahad. Well, thank you very much for a very important question. And look, on the issue of trust, I think that trust in politics and in Parliament has been corroded. And that is the most fundamental reason for that is because Parliament asked the people to vote on membership of the EU, and then Parliament has repeatedly refused to honour that promise, to respect the views of the people. And I'm afraid that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party are now blocking Brexit. The way I think it's absolutely true. The way to restore trust in politics is to get Brexit done and move forward. We have a great deal that enables us to do it. I'm unclear as to why it's necessary to spend another year in a debate about Brexit, which is, as Fahad says, is corrosive.
Thank you very much. Time is up. Mr. Corbyn, your first response.
Trust is something that has to be earned, and as a public representative, you have to listen to the people that elected you in the first place, and you have to listen to people all over the country in all walks of life. I spend a great deal of time travelling around the country, listening to people, be they chief executives, workers, people sweeping the street, or the homeless. Everybody you meet knows something you don't know. Leadership is about listening to people, trying to put their ideas into practice and finally come to a decision in which you can take a country and our society forward. My style of leadership is actually to listen to people and try and bring consensus together in my own party and obviously within Parliament. Because the issues we face of division in our society do have to be conquered. They're not going to be conquered by diktat, but only by listening and taking us forward that way.
To keep you both for time. Thank you very much. Fahad put his finger right on something very specific in this question. How can the nation trust you to have the personal integrity and the individual strength of character? Mr. Corbyn, how would you respond to that particular point?
I think we have to represent people, take decisions and be honest with people about why you're taking the decisions that you are and how to bring people together. My whole strategy on Brexit has been to recognise whether you voted Remain and live in a private rented accommodation and in Port and in London, voted Leave and you live in the north and are in the same situation, your issues are the same. The problems of poverty, inequality and division within our society. Bring people together, don't divide them.
Well, I would just say to Fahad, look at what I have said I'm going to do as a politician, and look what I've delivered. Whether it was as Mayor of London or now as Prime Minister, I said that we would put 20,000 more police officers on the streets of our city, and we are of our country, and we are recruiting them now. I said we'd upgrade 20 hospitals and have 40 new hospitals. That programme is going ahead. We are uplifting funding for education across the country. We're lifting up the living wage by its biggest ever expansion.
Okay, but this is about...
I said we would deliver Brexit, and we will deliver Brexit.
Thank you.
But we can only do it if we clear this parliamentary blockage.
Forgive me, Mr Johnson, but this is about personal integrity and individual character. Does the truth matter in this election?
I think it does. And I think it's very important. I think it's very important to hear from... I've been very clear about the deal that I've done. There it is. It's in black and white. You can read it. We don't know. We don't know what Mr Corbyn is proposing.
He won't come clean.
He won't come clean with the electorate about what he is proposing to do,
Corbyn,
nor will he come clean
Mr. Corbyn
about whether he would
support
that deal or not.
I think we've been very clear on our policies in relation to Europe. I think we're also very clear on all the other policies that will be unveiled in our manifesto on Thursday, and they will be accompanied by a fully costed grey book with it. So every pledge we make will be fully funded, because I believe the British people deserve that knowledge, deserve to know what we're going to do, and deserve a government that is actually not going to preside over rising homelessness, increasing inequality and chaos in the NHS.
Okay.
Instead, they're going to invest in the future of this country.
Gentlemen, will you take some personal responsibility for the way the debate has unfolded in politics in this country? We know, of course, Mr Johnson, that people point to the fact that you promised 40 times on record we'd be out of the EU on October the 31st. One of your former chief of staffs from your time as London Mayor said that you'd betrayed every person you'd ever had any dealings with. And we know, Mr Corbyn, there are big questions about anti-Semitism within Labour, for example. We know that the Board of Deputies of British Jews have said you and your allies have been responsible for turning a once great party into an into a cesspit of anti-Semitism, were their words. Can you both take some responsibility for the way the debate has turned in this country?
Anti-Semitism is an absolute evil and scourge within our society. Racism in any form is a scourge in our society. I have taken action in my party where anyone has committed any anti-Semitic acts or made any anti-Semitic statements. They are either suspended or expelled from the party, and we've investigated every single case. We do take this very, very seriously indeed, because I do not want to live in a society where racism is rife. I understand and recognise the history, the desperate history of the Jewish people in the 20th century, which came about from an unrestriction of anti-Semitism in the 1920s. We've got to stand up against racism in any form in our society.
Thank you. And on the question of telling the truth in politics, Mr Johnson, your response to that? The points that I put you on those issues.
Well, I'm just listening with open mouth to what Jeremy Corbyn had to say about
address the point.
About what he's done to stamp out anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, because I'm afraid it's a complete failure of leadership, what's happened in the Labour Party with anti-Semitism. But the failure of leadership is even worse when you look at what is happening on their Brexit policy. Because
Mr Johnson, before you go any further on this,
what the people of this country want to hear, what they want to hear is clarity about whether he believes in the deal that he is proposing to do.
We have heard your points on that, Mr Johnson. This was a question about personal integrity.
The people in Brussels who will be doing that deal.
This was a question from Fahad about personal integrity and character. So let's just try to take stock before we go for the ad break. There are many people, and many politicians indeed, that feel that the nastiness of political debate in this country has simply got out of control. Will you two tonight look at one another, and no matter who becomes Prime Minister, make a gesture to improve things today? Could you make a pledge and promise that whoever becomes Prime Minister improves the nature of debate in this country?
The debate in Parliament before Parliament was dissolved was vicious and horrible, and some terrible remarks were made, particularly to and about women MPs. I asked the Speaker to convene a meeting of all party leaders. Mr Johnson sent a representative there, and we agreed that this was unacceptable conduct, and I absolutely agree with that.
Thank you. Will you both make a pledge to improve things? And perhaps, gentlemen, could you shake hands to make a pledge to improve politics?
Gesture. Look,
thank you very much indeed.
I strongly agree with what Jeremy has.
Thank you.
Well, then you might need to make some other statements as well.
OK, we've got a pledge from you both there. After the break, a promise from us. We will move on from Brexit to other issues this evening. Next, on Johnson versus Corbyn, we'll be talking about issues like the NHS, the economy, and possibly Prince Andrew. let's have our next question, and it comes from Omar Shahab, and it's on the NHS. Omar.
I'm a hospital doctor, and I see firsthand the unsustainable pressure on the NHS. Elderly patients stuck on trolleys in corridors, unacceptably long waiting times for operations. Aside from pledging more money for the health service, how will you ensure that the health service can meet future demands, and would that involve any privatisation?
Dr Shahab, thank you very much indeed for first response. Mr Corbyn.
I think the NHS is a wonderful and brilliant institution, but it is suffering under the most incredible pressure. The staff are unbelievably stressed by the job they have to do and the insufficiency of facilities to deal with it. There are 33,000 nurse vacancies at the moment in the NHS. I'll give a story. Yesterday, a woman, a friend of mine, died at 6:30 yesterday morning from secondary breast cancer. The day before, she'd gone to hospital at the recommendation of her GP in order to get urgent treatment. She waited 8 hours. The nurses that were trying to help her were unable to get anyone to see her because they were under such strain and stress. And so she recorded a video saying, please, in my memory, make sure nobody else goes through this pain. We've got to fund our NHS properly and fill the vacancies and make sure it's there for all time. It's one of the most civilised things about this country.
Thank you, Mr Corbyn.
Well, thank you, Omar, and I agree passionately with what you've said about the NHS. It's absolutely vital that we support it, and it is one of the single most beautiful and brilliant things about Britain and about our society. And we are determined to fund it not just now, but for the long term. In this One Nation Conservative government, we're putting record sums in, £34 billion. We are, as I said earlier on, we're not just upgrading 20 hospitals, but we are building 40 new hospitals as a result of the decisions taken by this government. We will invest in GPs. We'll have tens of thousands more nurses, 6,000 more GPs. And our objective is to have a health service that is not just better for doctors and nurses, but better for patients as well.
Thank you.
We can achieve
Mr.
that
Johnson.
only if we have a strong economy.
Thank you.
And I'm afraid, which is what we do
Thank you
have
very much indeed.
That's
your time is up.
It will be a
question.
huge
Thank
mistake.
You, Mr. Johnson. Your time is up. Mr. Corbyn.
Well, the problem is that the A&E performance is now at its worst ever. There are 4 million people waiting for operations. There are all the vacancies that have not been filled within the NHS. The Health and Social Care Act allows the privatisation of services. And indeed, we have the nonsense of our National Health Service being taken to court by private operators because they didn't get contracts from it. Let's end the privatisation within the NHS and instead have a fully funded NHS for all people.
Let's let Mr. Johnson respond on that.
We are investing.
It's a specific question on privatisation and private provision.
Of course, we're not privatising the NHS, nor do we have any. Of course, we are investing 30, nor will the NHS. Just let me repeat this point. Nor will the NHS be ever up for sale in any negotiation. Let me repeat that point and lay this myth to rest. We will continue to fund the NHS massively as we are. We can only do so because we have a strong and dynamic economy, which is, and by the way, don't forget that under Labour, they ruined the public finances. They did. Liam Byrne said himself there was no money left. The economy has grown every year in the last 9 years. And what could be more ruinous? What could be more ruinous for the NHS than a crackpot plan for a 4-day week, which would add massively to the burdens not just of the NHS, but of every public service
Mr. Johnson.
in the country.
Mr. Corbyn, respond to this. And this is the proposal for a 4-day week for workers across the economy within 10 years of the Labour government.
It is about reducing the working week all across the economy, paid for by productivity increases all across. Britain works longer than most. Well, people need to be aware that actually a shorter working week is probably a good thing for their health and well-being, as is decent pay. What I would also say to Mr. Johnson is that his proposal for 40 new hospitals, which he grandly announced in July, turns out to be 6 reconfigurations without any clarity as to where they're actually going to be.
OK, Mr Johnson.
Well, that is totally untrue. We're doing 20 upgrades. And yes, it is true that we are starting with 6, but the seed funding has got in.
So where did the 40 come from?
40 new hospitals. And the investment is going in now. And the only reason that investment can be made is because we have a robust economy. And let me make another point. The single biggest threat to our economy and our ability to fund the NHS is our failure to get Brexit done.
OK, well,
ask the governor of that. It's absolutely true. It's hanging over this country and over this economy. It's stopping investment
I know
coming
you
in.
want to return to Brexit, Mr Johnson, but in this specific moment, we are talking about the NHS. On the issue of privatisation and private provision with the NHS, sometimes it is there, provided by organisations that are not for profit. It has extended capacity within the NHS. Will you rule out any privatisation in the NHS, any private provision within the NHS under...
The principle is to ensure that all people that work in the NHS are employed by the NHS on similar contracts across the NHS. The internal market must go within the NHS, and what is happening is privatisation of services across the NHS, and I think that is very, very damaging to the whole principles of the NHS. We also have problems of social care, which are not being addressed either, and there are about 1 million people waiting for social care at the present time.
Thank you, Mr. On that specific point, one quick answer, Mr Johnson. Will there be a policy on social care in your manifesto, yes or no?
Yes, there will, and we think that nobody should pay for their cost of their social care by selling their home, and everybody should have dignity and security in their old age.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your responses on that subject. Now, of course, you will have heard that both have made significant spending pledges over the past couple of weeks, and not just on the NHS. And Beverly Davis from Newport has a question related to this. Beverly.
I'm a care home laundry assistant earning minimum wage. I've worked all my life and have seen the real impact of austerity, which neither of you have. Now, you say there's plenty to spend. I'm concerned because neither of you have ever had to worry about money. You throw it away on silly election giveaways. What can you say to reassure me?
Thank you very much indeed. Mr Corbyn.
Well, we've had austerity for 9 years in this country. We've had a growth of billionaires in this country. We've had a growth of extreme poverty in this country. We've had a growth of personal debt from people trying to look after children, look after older people. I think the first thing has to be an increase in wages by having a £10 an hour living wage for all people, an end to zero hours contracts, and an investment strategy across the country that does give us an increase in manufacturing jobs all across Britain, which we're not having at the present time. I think this election is a turning point in the way in which we're going to manage our economy in the future.
Thank you, Mr Corbyn. Mr Johnson.
Well, to answer the question directly about how we're handling public finances in this electoral period, I would just point out that I have shelved a plan to cut corporation tax, saving... it's already the lowest in Europe. He would whack it up to the highest in Europe, but we've shelved that cut. That gives us the ability to put another £6 billion into the NHS and other priorities. And we will do that. We can do that because we have a strong economy. And what worries me about this country at the moment is that we are going to continue with this pointless paralysis. And I have no hesitation in repeating this point. If we go on with more deadlock and division next year, if we fail to get Brexit done, then the economy will suffer. And that is the reality.
But Beverly's question was very specific. She's saying now there seems to be plenty to spend. She is concerned that because neither of you have had to worry about money, you'll throw it away on silly election giveaways. Can we have a pledge here from both of you? Simply, is austerity over in the United Kingdom, Mr Corbyn?
We will end austerity. I'm absolutely clear about that. Yes, because it's been so brutal on the lives of so many people.
Of course, and I believe in spending, investing massively in our public services because we support, and which is what we are doing, but because we support a dynamic wealth-creating sector. And that's why it's a good idea, actually, to believe in business, to support businesses, to support the wealth-creating sector of the economy.
Last election, gentlemen.
Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party have actually said that they want to overthrow capitalism and to destroy the basis of wealth creation in this country. I have to say, I think that would be disastrous for this country.
We will, over a period, over a parliament, increase corporation tax to around the levels it was in 2010 in order to reinvest properly in education, in order to pay for the ending of university tuition fees, to give every student a decent chance of going to university and life. And we will start to redress the grotesque levels of imbalance in our society. We're a society of billionaires and the very poor, neither of which are right.
Both of you are proposing, both of you gentlemen are proposing extraordinary levels of borrowing. At the last election, we were told by your predecessor, Mr Johnson, that there was no magic money tree. Have you found a magic money tree, Mr Johnson? And have you found perhaps more than one of them, Mr Corbyn?
No, we're operating... money forest he's got. We're operating within strict fiscal discipline and, yes, of course, we're investing now in the NHS and we're investing in our policing and investing in education because we have the fiscal headroom to do so. We're also going to do fantastic things for this country with infrastructure, with uniting the whole country, with better high-speed rail, with telecommunications. We're going to do fantastic things for this country. You can only do that if interest rates are low. Yes. And the rate at which, Labour would borrow would push up interest rates for every household in the country.
Thank you. A response from on that particular point.
The reality of austerity has been to hit the funds of local authorities, has meant the life chances of children have been damaged by underfunding schools, head teachers going out collecting money in order to keep a school going, young people with no after-school clubs, no youth centre to go to, and the levels of dislocation and poverty in so many areas of Britain, deliberately, because of austerity, must and will change. Yes, we will invest in education, we will invest in housing, we will invest in health.
Of course, all of this, gentlemen, is, of course, predicated on what sort of Brexit deal either of you might be able to achieve. But we're going to move on to some other subject matters now in our debate, something a little different. We've had hundreds and hundreds of questions from ITV viewers, and now we're going to have a quick-fire section on a wide variety of issues to try to learn a little bit more about where the leaders stand on those other issues. So if you could say in a few words as possible, perhaps even a yes or no, gentlemen, given that we're looking at the clock, that
How do you define a few words?
Well, just editing, 1, 2, or just give us a clear, precise answer. The first question is Sue from Leeds. Is the monarchy fit for purpose? Jeremy Corbyn.
Needs a bit of improvement.
Mr Johnson.
The institution of the monarchy is beyond reproach.
Is Prince Andrew fit for purpose?
Before we discuss Prince Andrew, I think we should discuss the victims that are there because of what Epstein was doing. And I think there are very, very serious questions that must be answered, and nobody should be above the law, but the primary position ought to be the proper treatment of those people who are victims of the most appalling behaviour by apparently Epstein and many others.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Johnson.
I think all our sympathies should be, obviously, with the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, and the law must certainly take its course.
Of course. Thank you very much indeed, of course. And we know that we've heard from Prince Andrew this week, and we'll move on now to our next question from Andrew from Liverpool. Do you agree that climate change is the biggest issue in our country today? Mr Johnson.
I think it's a colossal issue for the entire world. And the UK is meeting that challenge with the most far-reaching ambition to get to carbon-neutral by 2050. And I know you're not wanting me to say this, but we need to get Brexit done in order to deliver on those priorities.
OK, Mr Corbyn, is it the biggest?
It is the most massive issue facing the whole world. When the poorest people in the poorest countries lose out because of flooding and unusual weather patterns, when we have unusual weather patterns in this country, when we have extreme levels of air pollution, we have to have a green industrial revolution where we invest for the future in sustainable industries and jobs and prevent the continuing damage to our natural world and our environment.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Which current... This is a question from Tony from Bristol. Which current foreign leader do you most admire, Mr Johnson?
Which current foreign leader? Well, it's a very good question. I think I would like the EU 27, all of them, because they did me a fantastic deal, which enables us to come out of the EU. And I have yet to hear, and I'm going to ask him again. But I've yet to hear what the leader of the opposition would do with his deal and whether he campaigned to leave or remain. I feel obliged to ask this question.
Mr Johnson, Mr Corbyn.
I think the person I admire most in the world at the present time is the General Secretary of the United Nations, Guterres, trying to bring the world together.
OK, thank you very much indeed. OK, didn't get quite through as many as we thought we might, gentlemen, but we're going to have, before our concluding statements, perhaps time for one more short seasonal question, and this is from Ben West in Kent.
I think we should all learn to be a little more kind to each other, including those we disagree with. With this in mind, and leaving politics aside for a moment, what present would you leave under the Christmas tree for each other this year?
Leaving politics aside, gentlemen. OK, leaving politics aside, what gift would you leave for Mr Johnson under the Christmas tree?
Well, I know Mr Johnson likes a good read. So what I would probably leave under the tree for him would be A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and he can then understand how nasty Scrooge was.
Thank you. Mr Johnson.
Well, I think what I would probably leave a copy of... since you want a literary effort, a copy of my brilliant Brexit deal, which allows us to come out. I will wait. Maybe by next year we will be able to see his own
non-political, Mr Johnson. Non-political.
What I think, Mr Corbyn, Mr Corbyn shares my love of plants and trees. I think maybe
one of your little cardboard buses, maybe.
Some damson jam.
Lovely. Damson jam. OK, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for that.
He doesn't even want my damson jam.
Thank you. A fascinating 50 minutes of debate. I will now ask Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson for a very short concluding statement. Mr Corbyn first.
You've seen tonight the real choice you'll have in this election, and your voice must be heard. If you haven't registered to vote, please go online and do it now. This is a once-in-a-generation election to end privatisation and give the National Health Service the funding it needs, to give people the final say and get Brexit sorted, to tackle the climate emergency that threatens our futures, to invest in good jobs in every region and nation of our country. I ask that you vote for hope and vote for Labour on the 12th of December.
Mr Corbyn, thank you. Mr Johnson. Mr Johnson.
Our choice is very simple. We can get Brexit done, or we can spend another groundhog year with another referendum when Mr Corbyn, you've heard tonight, cannot answer the fundamental question. Is he for Remain or Leave, and what price would he pay to secure Nicola Sturgeon's support to enter number 10? And if he can't answer those questions tonight, I don't think he's fit to lead our country. So let's end the dither and delay, the deadlock and the divisions. And if we have a working majority, a Conservative majority, I pledge we will have a parliament that works for you, that focuses on the NHS and the cost of living, because when we get Brexit done by January the 31st, we will go forward as a united and confident nation that has shown our faith in the judgment of our
Out of time. People. Mr Johnson, Mr Corbyn, thank you very much indeed. That is the end of the first part of our live political programming tonight. An hour from now, we'll hear from 4 more party leaders on what they think matters at this election. That's the ITV election interviews. But for now, from Salford, from all of us here, good night.
As Julie Etchingham just said, make sure you're here for the ITV election interview.